Alrighty. So what I'm going to do in this session is I'm going to expand upon dealing with bed bugs in multifamily housing settings. So I'm going to kind of talk more about how to manage bed bugs within communities. How do we take a widespread problem and make it much more manageable? And, you know, listen, we can talk about ethics and we can talk about all those things all day and they're all fine. But many of you are property managers in this room, and let's be honest, there's a business behind this. You need to reduce expense. You need to reduce all those things. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So there is some repeat content in here that's in there intentionally to drive different points home. So we'll focus on that. I am going to leave a fairly significant amount of time for questions at the end of this session. My first session was more of a jam as much information in as I can session. This will be, and I want it to be, a question and answer interactive session. I had a lot of people asking me what session they should go to. I can't answer that because I don't know what the other session is going to talk about. What I can say is if some of you are in here because you didn't fit into either session, like a school administrator or something like that, be absolutely please ask questions at the end about schools. I would love to talk about bed bugs in public environments and how I think one of the biggest problems that are associated with bed bugs is the hysteria that they create. It has to stop. It has to stop. And so now you're going to hate me, though, because I'm going to say something else you're probably not going to like. It probably has to start, unfortunately, in this room. In that we have to be providing good information, and when people are acting like psychos trying to make you shut entire school districts down because one bug might have been found, unfortunately, the no has to come from you. It has to come from you, and it has to be, this is why. We are not going to do that. The hysteria will continue, but hopefully eventually people will get the idea and the information. But the bottom line is the hysteria has to stop. Because as long as we're doing things and overreacting, and I'm not saying, listen, if somebody's done this, it's not a criticism. A lot of times overreaction is created by the pressure you're receiving politically from your communities. I understand that. But at some point, somebody has to say, no, we're not doing it. I don't care how you feel about it. This is why we're not doing it. And move forward. And so, but it does have to stop. And believe me, I've seen all the stories. I've seen entire schools shut down because somebody thinks they saw a bug. Ridiculous, obviously. Entire schools as well. But we have to be providing people with information, and what that information will do is it will start to calm the hysteria. People overreact because they don't understand. That's what causes overreaction. And as a parent, myself, of a 3- and a 4-year-old, there is nobody more irrational than a parent. And so, and I always make this joke about a lot of the sessions that I do. So New Jersey, and I'm sure Ohio, has a school of IPM policy where you're not supposed to apply pesticides until it's an emergency situation, blah, blah, blah. So that law was put in place to reduce pesticide exposure to children. As a parent, I get it. I'm cool with that. I don't really want my kids being exposed to pesticides if it's not necessary. That law was put in place because parents didn't want pesticides within 5 miles of their kids. I'm cool with that. Now that bed bugs are in the classroom, they will let you treat their child directly with pesticide. And they are totally cool with it. There's nobody more irrational than a parent. For good reason. I will tell you that my least favorite environment to deal with is schools. It's my least favorite because it's just so much craziness and hysteria and irrational behavior. And people just, it's funny to watch a parent who's, 38 start acting like a 14-year-old in terms of the way they're reacting to a problem. It's like, please stop. So, nonetheless, that's not what we're going to focus on. We can talk about that at the tail end, though. I'd be more than happy to talk about it. So let's talk about multifamily housing and dealing with bed bugs. Now, we've been talking all day about how bed bugs are back. They're here to stay. These are infestation maps across the United States with the red dots being little infestations. They're not going anywhere. Obviously, when we talk about the spread of bed bugs, there is a lot of focus put on a lot of different things in terms of bed bugs being introduced from a hotel room. Bed bugs being, so somebody asked in an earlier session about bed bugs in offices. and employees are saying, I introduced a bed bug from the office to my house and I want you to pay for the infestation. So let's talk about hotels for a second. So when you go into a hotel room, let's say you're a pest control person, remember the infestation levels I talked about this morning? The low, moderate, and high? What do you typically think you find in hotels? A low. And I would say, remember I told you that 70% of infestations in apartments were low. I bet in hotels that's probably over 90% are low because they're finding it early on. So if you go and stay, let's say at the hotel, I got a story about the hotel I stayed in, but we'll tell that later. That's a little inappropriate for a church, but we'll tell it later. And so we stay at the hotel and we find there's 8 bed bugs in a room. What are the chances that, let's say, a bunch of those bed bugs find their way to your suitcase? It's multiple sexes. They then have to survive the transport to your car, survive the transport in the trunk back home. If you're flying, they have to survive the flight. They now have to get back in the car, blah, 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 blah. So you have 8 bugs in a hotel room. What is the likelihood that you introduce a reproducing problem back to your house? Probably low. It's probably unlikely. And so when we talk about, there's a lot of focus put on hotels, and I'm not saying hotels aren't a problem. They are. But it's not nearly the attention that people pay to it. Now, it's a problem for you staying in a hotel room and being bitten. That's a problem. But as far as introducing a reproducing problem back, I bet it's a lot less common than people think. This, though, is a totally different situation. You want to talk to me about why I think the number one reason people spread bed bugs from one place to another, what that reason is, it's this. It's discarded furniture. It's infested, discarded furniture. On the other hand, when I take a piece of furniture like this into my house, I'm introducing 300 bed bugs. Totally different story. And obviously, many of you in this room have seen this before. You've seen people taking this stuff into their homes. You can cut it, you can spray paint, you can do whatever you want to do it. Somebody's going to take it in. And listen, there's people who are of lesser means and don't have anything to sit on. I've actually seen people sleeping on a mattress that's not just spray painted with bed bugs. It actually has springs sticking up through the mattress to the point that I don't understand how they didn't impale themselves while sleeping on it. Yet they're sleeping on it. And so this, to me, is the number one factor. And we have to educate, we have to put policy and procedure in place to try to slow the movement of discarded furniture. And then we have to educate people to stop doing this, or if you're going to do it, let me go back to that. If you're going to take furniture in that's discarded or used, make sure you're doing a very basic inspection of it to make sure you're not introducing bugs into your home. So there's obviously lots of different ways bed bugs can get into your houses. You know, travel, overnight guests, summer camps is a big one. We've seen a lot of summer camps with pretty major issues. Obviously, the last one, laundromats, public transportation, theaters are a little less likely. You know, not to freak anybody out, but if there's a bug in a chair that you're sitting in, it's probably just a handful of bugs. And then again, I go back to that hotel story I told. Listen, I'm not saying you should be comfortable with taking a bug home, but the reality of bringing that reproducing infestation home is not that strong. But when we talk about the spread of bed bugs, and today is the perfect example of how we address this, the number one reason bed bugs spread the way they do is because of ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance. Whenever anybody says the word ignorance, they think it's a negative connotation. I don't mean it in a negative way. I mean it in that you're just not aware of the problem. And what that is that's just a basic societal effect. You know, and I always use me as an example here. When we talk, look at my life, for instance. I, travel around a lot speaking. I'm working, long weeks. My wife is a vet. She's working opposite hours of me half the time. I've got 2 completely insane, destructive boys at home that are 3 and 4 years old. They in and of themselves are a full-time job. There are days that I struggle to find 5 minutes to take a shower, let alone pay attention to a problem that's not directly affecting me. If I ask you, tell me about Legionnaire's disease, Could you give me a rundown on anything to do with Legionnaire's disease, let alone, and of course, you're probably a disease person, and I probably just put my foot in my mouth. But that's beside, if that fails on you, I'm going to somebody else. But if it's a problem that doesn't directly affect you, what do you know about it? You don't have the time in your life to be researching all these different problems that don't directly affect you. And so when you look back at what caused the media stir in 2010, it was when bedbugs were found in the AMC Theater in downtown Manhattan. That next 2 weeks, I was in every TV studio probably 3 times a week doing interviews on bedbugs. But what it did is it took bedbugs from Mrs. Johnson's house on the other side of town, which was on the news, and you say, that sucks for Mrs. Johnson, but how does that affect you? It doesn't. But when they're found in the AMC Theater, when they're found in Abercrombie & Fitch, when they're found in Victoria's Secret, when they're found in whatever retail store you want to name, that now impacts you. Because I don't go to Victoria's Secret, but that's besides the point. But I do shop at some of those other stores. And so that takes it into our living rooms. And so when that happens, or when people find bugs inside their home, they're caught off guard. They don't know anything about it. They want to know everything right now. But there's a very real reason why that happens, and it's because we're busy as a society. We're not paying attention to problems that don't directly affect us. And if bedbugs aren't directly affecting you, you probably don't know anything about it. But slowing that hysteria is dealing with this. That's how you slow the hysteria. We have to give basic information. So 2006, bedbugs get going, in New Jersey at least. Quickly move into apartments and condos. We talked about apartments and condos earlier today. You know, when bedbug infestations become severe, this can be one of the more difficult environments to deal with them in. And obviously, they will spread very rapidly through these environments. We have seen bedbugs reservoiring in lower socioeconomic settings. We talked about that this morning. You know, a lot of it has to do with the money associated or not associated with many of the families in these communities. And it's funny, I give a lot of talks to the pest control industry, and one of the big things that people like to talk about is how they go into affordable housing communities and they can't get anyone to cooperate. There's lots of bugs, there's lots of stuff, and no one will cooperate. And I say to people, the key to life to me is perspective. Have you ever truly worked inside someone's home and actually sat and talked with their family who is struggling to feed themselves, let alone deal with this stupid bedbug prep sheet you just gave them? Trying to keep their kids alive, out of drugs, trying to feed and pay for their own family's needs. And then you're sitting there and putting 6 hours of bedbug prep work, and then you're going to sit there and whine about how they're not doing it? There's a lot bigger concerns in a lot of lives than bedbugs. Now, for many of us sitting in this room, that may not ring a bell, but that's why I say perspective. You've got to put yourself in people's shoes and understand where they're coming from. Now, I'm not saying that that alleviates anyone of not following a prep sheet. It does not. But it has to be reasonable in regards to what you're asking from anyone. And I talked about that this morning. So the bottom line is that we're seeing these bugs reservoir in these communities. There are people within these communities that aren't reporting the problem, and they spiderweb. We talked about all that this morning. We showed this gentleman this morning. We said how this guy is what we call patient zero. He's the patient who starts the issue within a building, and then it spreads from there. And then I was going to show this video to, again, drive home the impact of this type of person. So this is the one I referred to this morning that's going to probably ruin everybody's lunch, even though you just had it. This is a single-family home in residential New Jersey. Your average residential community, it's the guy that lives down the street that doesn't cut his grass as much as you'd like to see. We get a call from him saying the bed bugs started showing up about 3 weeks ago. The elderly gentleman and his son were sleeping in these beds every single night. And I've seen a lot of bad stuff in my days. This was by far the worst we've ever seen. We estimated over 1 million bed bugs inside this house. meaning that they didn't notice the bugs until 3 weeks ago. Or they did. Remember how I said this morning nobody in their right mind lives in a situation like this? It plays out again, where there was definitely mental issues at play here. There were bed bugs everywhere. The kitchen counter, every box, every piece of clutter, everything. You can kill it whenever, it's almost over anyway, but you can kill it and go back to the presentation. Thank you. Yay! Anybody want any Subway? All right, so the bottom line, and again, the point I'm trying, not just to gross everybody out, the point I'm trying to make here is, again, this father and this son, I can tell you on the nightstand next to where the father was sleeping, there were more prescription pill bottles than I've ever seen in my life. That person is going to doctor's offices, is going to CVS and Walgreens, is going to all those places. How many bed bugs are they spreading? And so that is really the point I'm trying to drive home with that video, not just the shock and awe factor of it. And so somebody asked before, were they reacting? And I talked about this earlier. You know, the University of Kentucky study at the bottom found that 30% of people do not react at all to bed bugs. And the only group that reacts less than that are senior citizens. Senior citizens were found to react even less. And so senior citizens reacting maybe 50 to 80% or more, where they're not reacting at all. The people living inside that house showed no visible signs of reaction. There's 0% chance they weren't anemic at some level. But I also say if bed bugs could kill people, that was it. And they were alive. So anyway. So we talked about that Rutgers research before, that when these infestations exist, they're going to spiderweb through communities. That leads to that finding that whatever you think you have 2 to 3 times as many infestations. As I kill myself. Bed bugs move between multi-occupancy buildings. We talked about this before this morning. So 25% of the time in garden-style apartment communities, you will find bed bugs in a surrounding apartment. So 1 out of every 4 infestations, you will find them in a surrounding apartment. What I will also tell you about that is when you find them in a surrounding apartment, usually the one you find in the surrounding is the source of the problem, not the one you're in. The one you're in is the person that didn't want them and called. Usually the one in the surrounding unit is bad, and they're just not reporting it. The same dynamic goes in offices. When you have a report of a bed bug in an office, typically it's one of the cubicles around where the bug was found. That's the actual source. It is unlikely that somebody who reports bed bugs to their office manager has them crawling all over them at home. They're actually going to probably squash that bug and say, crap, I need to take care of the problem I have at home. They're not going to report it. And so, again, keep that in mind. We talked this morning about high-rise senior living. When you get into high-rise senior living situations, the research has suggested that surrounding unit infestation can be as high as 80%. That's a lot. That's a lot. And so we talked about the generally accepted way to use monitors this morning. We talked about how monitors are usually used to supplement a visual inspection. And again, I know we talked a little bit about this morning, but I just want to drive home the point. 50 to 70% of the time, visual inspections will find a low level, but that leaves 30 to 50% where they are going to miss a low level. And so the question is can we implement monitors in this situation? I got about 2 or 3 questions over the break about canines, and so I will talk briefly about canines in a second. So when we talk about detecting bed bugs, what options do we have? We have visual inspection, passive monitors. So a passive monitor is a monitor that does not have a lure associated with it. The best example I can give you of a passive monitor is a glue board. A glue board is only going to catch bugs if they walk across it. There's nothing drawing bugs to a glue board. Well, no, let me rephrase that. Nothing drawing bed bugs to your average glue board. There are some glue boards that have attractants infused in them, but your average situation. Active monitors are monitors with lures. And so the one at our booth that some of you may have seen, the little active sweat packet, that's an example of an attractant. And so when we put that inside a monitor, that's an active monitor. Another example would be a carbon dioxide trap. Again, you're using an attractant. Canine scent detection, obviously dogs to detect bed bugs. There are many dogs here, and we'll talk briefly about that. And then there are several others. So let's first start with visual inspections. Highly unreliable, not highly unreliable, highly is a little strong, but they can be unreliable at detecting low-level infestations. Now listen, visual inspections are a great first step for detecting bed bugs. It's not to say not to do them. They will find almost 100% of moderate and high-level infestations, and they'll still find a good portion of low levels. And so it's a great place to start, but it will still miss a lot of infestations. Glue boards we just talked about. You know, that's a low-lying glue board. They're typically used for cockroaches. They smell like food. And so what we have seen and what research has shown is that glue boards may not be the best option for detecting bed bugs. They've actually shown at University of Florida where bugs will walk up to glue and they'll get, let's say, their antenna or leg stuck in the glue, and they actually have the ability to back up off the glue, and then they know not to touch it again. And they'll go around. Yes, bugs learn. Learn's a little stretch of a definition, but they do learn at some level. And so bed bugs will potentially go around glue boards. If you are going to use glue boards, which I don't have a problem with, you want to put out as many as you can, and you want to put them as close to the sleeping environment as you can. Again, I would choose other monitors out there, but you can use them. Commercially viable CO2. So, I don't know if somebody here has a night watch, but I know I've talked about it previously with somebody. There are devices out there that do artificially produce CO2. Carbon dioxide is the best attractant for bed bugs. Carbon dioxide is what is going to draw them from distance. What I can tell you is that there are very few monitors on the market that are economically feasible and operationally sound in regards to monitoring for bed bugs. It's very difficult to create affordable carbon dioxide monitors. The Verify, which is the one on the top left, was just pulled off the market by FMC. That little box was about $30 a use, and the carbon dioxide would only last about 12 to 24 hours. And so again, worked very well, but not very expensive. Too expensive to implement whole building, and again, was more used as a niche product. Night Watch, the one on the bottom right, is another one that is very effective, but from a pest control company's perspective, it's not very easily to operationally implement. You as a property manager or as a facility, you could easily buy a Night Watch and use it in select settings. They run about, I think, $300 or so. And again, you'd be reusing it, obviously, but you could totally do that. There's nothing saying you couldn't do that. It does work very well. But it's just expensive and it's difficult to implement. Now, there are do-it-yourself carbon dioxide sources out there. This is the one designed at Rutgers University. It's called the do-it-yourself sugar yeast trap. And if you go online, remember I referenced Bedbug TV before, you can go on YouTube, and I filmed a video on how to make this trap. There's a very specific mix of stuff you have to put together. What you're more or less doing is brewing beer. You're mixing water, sugar, yeast, and then that reaction gives off carbon dioxide. It does work. For people who are managing their own properties, it's very cheap. So it's definitely worth considering. What I can tell you is from a pest control company's perspective, it's not the most professional looking design, and it's extremely sloppy. And so I, as a pest control company, do not want somebody going in and kicking this over, and then I have to deal with them and the cleanup and blah, 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 blah. So I would rather not use these from a pest control company perspective. You can also use dry ice. Dry ice is condensed carbon dioxide. Again, from dry ice perspective, you want to make sure you're not putting it in places where people are going to be able to access it. Dry ice can be very dangerous. And so again, from a pest control company perspective, not the best option to me. But if you have a vacant unit that you want to monitor for bed bugs, dry ice and sugar yeast isn't a bad option because they will produce CO2. They're just not very commercially viable. And dogs. And so I actually had the opportunity to handle a dog myself for about 3 months. What I can tell you is that canine scent detection is much more difficult than it looks. When you first see it done, you're like, okay, the guy's walking the dog on a leash. I got this. Yeah, it's not that easy. And so what I can tell you is that our opinion of dogs are that they are really a very strong option for public settings. And so this room is the perfect example. If I had to inspect this room, the church calls me up, I think we have a bed bug situation, how long is it going to take me as a human to inspect this room? Probably about 7 months. And so a dog could obviously sweep this room in however long, 2 hours, 4 hours a day, whatever it might be. So in a room like this, there may be very few, if any, options to find bed bugs. And that's where I think dogs have a very strong fit, is in stuff like this. Or large 100,000 square foot office spaces, or whatever the case may be. What the reality behind dogs is that Rutgers conducted a study, and what they did in this study is they blindly called canine scent companies in the New York metro area and asked them to come out and do a whole building apartment inspection. And Rutgers had already mapped out where all of the bed bug infestations were. They knew exactly where they were. They knew what units had problems, and they knew what units most likely did not. And so the teams would come in blindly, and they'd go through the building, and then Rutgers would obviously evaluate the results of the dogs. And what they found is that on any given day, the canine scent teams that they had come in were anywhere from 8 to 13 teams they worked with, were anywhere from 10 to 90% effective. So wide range of results. There were teams that would work very good on one day and be 90% effective at finding the bugs, and then there'd be other teams that were 10% effective. What I can tell you is by seeing the results of the study, there were more teams less than 50 than above 50. And on any given day, a team could come in and be 90% effective and come back the next day and be 30% effective. Now, the bottom line is that you're working with a live organism. Dogs have good and bad days, just like humans have good and bad days. And so to me, with canines, it's all about knowing what to expect and then doing something to visually confirm what the dog is saying. And so if I have a dog come in there, it indicates, let's say, the presence of bed bugs on this chair. I'm going to visually inspect that chair. I'm going to see if I can confirm what the dog is saying. If I can't find anything, and let's say I have access to this room, I'm going to implement a monitoring program around that chair for about a week or two after. And I'm going to try to confirm what that dog is saying. And so basically, dogs can be a viable option, but in my opinion and many's opinion, you need to be trying to do something to confirm what the dog is saying. So what we're going to focus on moving forward is interception devices. We talked about these this morning, and again, what we're going for in the rest of this presentation is talking about reducing building-wide infestations. So we talked about that monitor model before, which is going into every unit, installing monitors, and then checking them periodically moving forward. Again, installing interception devices under beds and couches, and then checking them a week or two later. We talked about the under-the-leg interception devices this morning. And Rutgers research has actually shown that under-the-leg interception devices can detect 90% or better of low-level infestations within 2 weeks of installation. So they're very, very effective. As I said this morning, the downside to under-the-leg interception devices is that they are very obvious, and they need to be maintained periodically in terms of cleaning them. What Rutgers did, though, is they went into a property, and they basically installed the devices across the entire property. Before the start of this study they conducted, there were 16 infestations known by management. They couldn't get on top of the problem. They brought Rutgers in. And what Rutgers found through the installation of these devices was 55 infestations. So what is that, 3 times more? More than that. More than 3 times more. The number that they knew about. They were not aware of 71% of the problems. But what I'm trying to drive home here is this last bullet. What they did is that when they started the study, 15% of the property had a bedbug problem. When they identified infestations, they treated them. And then when they reevaluated the problem a year later, they had a 2% infestation rate. And that is what we're talking about when listen, people come up to me all the time and say, I got a 30% infestation rate, I'm going broke, I don't know what to do. I know what to do. You just have to commit to it. If you commit to it, I can get you where you need to be. Now, I understand that's coming from a technology guy or technical guy, and I'm not managing your budget. So I understand, I respect that. But I know how to do it, and this is how you do it. You have things going on that you don't know about. And so obviously, and this is just another example, we talked about the product this morning, the Volcano. And again, as I mentioned this morning, this is a product that I designed, so I'm not going to sit here and tell everybody that we don't have a vested interest in the success of this product. So don't worry so much about the product, worry about the results of the program. And so there's a picture of the bugs in the Volcano, and many of you have one of these, took one of these. And then there's the Active, which mimics sweat on the surface of the skin. This was designed at Rutgers University, and when you open this packet up and put it in place with any monitor that you use, it's basically turning that into a sweaty sock or a sweaty shirt. And we know from research done at, actually, the University of Minnesota, Dr. Stephen Kells had his graduate students wear the same set of socks for like a week. And then they took those socks and they put them in arenas to see if the bugs were attracted to them, and they found out that they were. And so bugs are attracted to sweat, and that's what this lure is doing. And so what we have found with the lure is that, and this is the reality behind that lure, the reality is that if the bugs come in contact with a device that is using the lure, what it's doing is it's increasing the chance that the bugs commit to it. If the bugs interact with a monitor, but it doesn't necessarily smell like food to them, they may walk away. If it smells like food, it increases the number of bugs it's going to catch. And so we have found with the lure that we can, catch significantly more bed bugs. It's not to say that devices won't work without the lure. It's just to say that the lure will increase the catch. And so this is an example of the effectiveness of lures and monitors, and that we did a field trial in a homeless shelter where we went around the homeless shelter and, okay, you notice the interception devices under the legs? They were so dirty that they were no longer working. They were so dusty, and you can actually see, if you look real carefully in that one in the bottom left-hand picture, you can kind of see that black shadow in the bottom of it. That's not shadow. That's just grime. And so what we did in this situation is we just went in and installed two of the volcanoes and an active volcano underneath each cot, and we went around the perimeter of the room, and we did a monitor with lure, monitor without, monitor with lure, monitor without. We'd wait 7 days, count bugs, and then switch them. Count bugs again. And basically what we found was that with the lure, we caught 60 bugs without 34. And so active monitors definitely have a place in regards to increasing the effectiveness of a monitor. And so this is the important study I want to focus on. So again, just to drive home what the Rutgers study showed, we did a study not too far away in Canton, Ohio. 199 apartments. Management was aware they had a problem, but they wanted to get on top of the problem a little bit more aggressively. They knew of 7 infestations. So we went through the entire property, and we installed a couple different placements. So we did active volcanoes under the beds. We did volcanoes under the beds. We would check them 2 weeks later. If we detected bugs, we'd try something else, this, that, and the other. So we'd check them after 2 weeks, see if there were bugs, check them after 4 weeks, see if there were bugs, and at the 4-week mark, we would conduct a visual inspection. And so there's the devices next to the legs, and there's the devices at the head of the bed. And so what we found in this study with a different product than the under-the-leg interception devices was that we had 7 infestations prior to the study, and the study itself found 29 infestations. So between the monitors and the visual inspection, we found 29 infestations. Again, that's 4 times the number of infestations they knew about. Are we getting the picture? Okay, I think we've driven that point home. And so there are more things going on than you know about. When we looked a little further at the data, the monitors under the beds, so these are almost, okay, let me hit 2 things before I talk about the results. There are 2 things you need to be aware about. Almost all the infestations in this study had 10 bugs or less. And in this little slide right here, we're only looking at the bed infestations. So remember how I said there were 29? This data set only has 19 in it because the 10 of the infestations were only in the couches, and we didn't have monitors under the couches. And so we looked at the 19 where we had bugs in the bed, and the monitors under the bed detected the infestation 6 times after 2 weeks, but 13 times after 4 weeks. Why that happened is because when you have 3 bugs in a bed, it takes time for them to move around. If you have somebody sleeping in that bed every single night, it may take time for them to move, to come down, to interact with anything you put underneath that bed. And so that's why it ended up taking a few weeks to detect those low-level problems. But remember, many of these people aren't reporting the problems in the first place. And so putting these monitors in place isn't necessarily a negative for a couple weeks. The infestations detected by the visual inspection was 11 of 19. And so we actually picked up 2 more infestations associated with beds with the monitors versus the visual inspection. And so what we basically found in this study is that with the monitors under the beds, we detected 70% of low levels within 4 weeks. Visual inspection picked up 58%. But the reality is, combining the two is the best way to go about it. And what I can tell you very honestly and upfront is that there were infestations where we'd find them in the bed, but they wouldn't be in the monitors. And we'd have infestations that we'd find in the monitors that wouldn't be in the bed. And so combining the two, if possible, is really the best way to go about this. And so if anybody wants an overview of that, I can provide it to them. Just email me. And so the summary of this portion of the presentation is that monitors can be used to help you deal with infestations, detect infestations early on, but more importantly, reduce infestation rates among communities and improve the quality of life for your residents when you're actually getting on top of these problems, reducing the number of infestations, and then putting these monitors in place that are catching bugs that are reducing the bites and the stress on the tenants. You're therefore improving the quality of life on your properties. And that, to me, is the most important point. Okay, so...